the light that leads within us to the birth of love and harmony and peace for all upon the earth. We are the festival, we are the light, we are the candles burning brightly in the night. We are the festival, we are the light, we are the candles burning brightly in the night. We are the festival, we are the light, we are the candles burning brightly in the night. Righteousness declines and wickedness is strong in the dying of an age as a new age comes along. That is when I rise again and yet again to light the flame of truth within the sons of men. I am light, I am true, I am the fire of the sun. I am the hope of all the earth, the spirit of the world. When men have lost their way and know not where to turn, and the future seems to end where the fires of hatred burn, then let men look within to see the rising of my flame of love to light the way again. I am love, I am truth, I am the power of the sun. I am the light within all men, the spirit of the world. When darkness speaks to hope, the hearts of many fear, when men cry out for help and no one seems to hear, that is when I rise again to shelter forth and saving men, let a newer world be born. Dying of an age as a new age comes along, that is when I rise again and yet again to light the flame of truth within the sons of men. I am light, I am true, I am the freedom of the stars, I am the destiny of man, the triumph of the world. I am light, I am true, I am the fire the hill. The winds blow about me, caressing me with change. Touch of new birth. I hear the wind, the soft voice of whispers. Rise up from
I speak with musical background. Over to the moment of silence. I definitely need this moment after rushing around like a mad woman. So I will light the candle and then just have a moment of silence. Like the proper attunement will be done later after my more worldly announcements. Yes, so let's just take a moment. So thank you and welcome. Lovely to see so many of you again. And I just wanted to have a few minutes before the evening starts. Oh no, it has started already. So anyway, I'm part of the evening. Because there are a few things I wanted to let you know. First of all, the cafe is actually open tonight. So just so that you know that afterwards, this is where you will be welcomed and where you can hang out afterwards and share with friends. So that's one thing. And the other things I have written down. Oh God, my nose is running, everything's happening at the same time. So I have to do this. So I guess first of all, I wanted to say that just to re-emphasize how important this is that you are all here. So because what we are doing is we are repairing, rebuilding systems that have been broken and haven't been used for a long time. So what you think is normal, that the buses are running, that everything's happening in the hall, it's not normal at all. We didn't have that for a long, long, long time. So really, with this in mind, I just want to welcome you again and thank you for being here and for giving us the opportunity to do that, because we need you to actually do it. Even candle holders with flowers, we got a bit sloppy there. We have the candle holders without flowers and stuff. Not good, not good. So it's a very good reminder in many things. And so that's one aspect. But the other one, of course, is the rebuilding, where we need to be part, all of us who have been inspired and deeply touched by the essence of the center. We are all called to rebuild to rebuild the center and to reconnect with the deepest essence of it. So that's why you're here. If you thought you're just here to celebrate, no. So really, and the other thing is also that this is pretty much, let's say maybe the first time, one of the first times, maybe the first time sounds better, the first time that the community has organized this conference. So before it was the foundation, and the foundation has or had at least, once upon a time when you knew it, had all the systems running and a conference office and all that. And the community is different. The community has grown over decades, and we have lots of elders and beautiful artists and creative people and engaged people, but we don't necessarily have the infrastructure to run conferences, to run, to get people forth and back, and so to feed people, particularly without the community center. So Cluny is also kind of flexing its muscles and offering meals, which is wonderful, and many of you have been there. So there is a bus running, and you hopefully have seen the bus schedule, but there's one bus running. So it's not so much space in there. So we really need to organize, if people are going to Cluny by car, that they wait when the bus is leaving, and if not everyone fits in, that they take people over to Cluny. So we really need to do the community thing. So there is not necessarily a full, well-working system for that. So we all need to work on it. And actually, the other thing is that I really would love to invite people, particularly here at the park again, to, when you make your meals, to cook more than just for one. I tried it out this brunch time, and Patricia came, and Helen came, and a few people came to have brunch with me. And it was really so lovely. And that is part of the rebuilding, is actually rebuilding relationship and eating together, sharing food together. So I have prepared, these pieces of paper. So this is more for people who live here at the park. And it says, so you're welcome at my table. So, and there you write down your name and what you're offering and how many people you are inviting. And so invite the park people to fill that in and put it up on a notice board, which will be up tomorrow. And on the other hand, people who would love to eat, I would invite you to actually look at the list and then put your name down. And just be curious who you come together with and who you share a meal with. And that is part of the rebuilding, of sharing deeply, of how we are touched by life, the way it is now, how it was for people to come back, and see the community center and the sanctuary being gone, and so many things, our hopes for the future. There's so much to share. So that is a very good way to do that. So I really hope that the park people will pick it up, particularly also, as I said yesterday, for the game for Wednesday lunchtime, because the break is very short. So everyone look down at the notice board, which will definitely be working by then. Tomorrow, promise. So there were a few more things. I'm not used to having a piece of paper. Oh yes, and then there's a few things that are not on my schedule. Not my schedule, you see, on the schedule. Sorry. And this is, for example, many of you know Brian Nobbs, and he died not very long ago. And there's actually an exhibition in Cologne House every day until Friday between 10 and 4 p.m. So if you have time to go there and have a look and just reconnect also with the amazing artist and amazing person Brian Nobbs was, and what he channeled in his drawings and paintings. And also in Cologne House, around on Friday, particularly in the late morning, the people, or some of the people who actually have bought Cologne House, you might have heard Marion Lee died, and her children, Iona and Michael, have sold it, and a group of community members have bought it. So they now start with running it as a B&B and have a community vision for the future. So if you're interested in that, then please go there on Friday around lunchtime and have a look. Now I closed my notebook again. There was more in there. You might have wondered what these badges are about. Have you? Has anyone? Yes? Thank you, Cornelia. Cornelia wondered, even though she knows, but it's always good to get a response. So many of you have actually, like kind of paid for the 1 week pass. We were wondering, how will we manage, this incredible challenge? Oh, I'm using too much time, I'm sorry. I should not talk so much. Anyway, these badges are for the people who bought the pass. If you don't have one, get one. And if you don't have one in the end, you can also get one. And then just one more thing, the Rainbow Bridge comes out every Wednesday at 2:00, and I thought it would be wonderful if we all pour out our appreciations for the center and what the center means to us, and like this, make a celebratory edition of the Rainbow Bridge. So I stop now. Sorry about that.
Did something happen? No, not yet.
Just take a minute.
The battery's died. What are we going to do? No, just give me a towel. I'm going to sort something out. I'll have a little sit down.
Hello, everybody. How's that? Does that sound? No. It's not working, is it? How's that? Yeah? I need the red one. Yeah. Okay. Thanks. Great. Excellent. Yeah. Nothing. And in the end, I thought that probably is the meaning of life. Yeah. So, yeah, that was the meaning of life, and I hope you heard it. So, hello, everybody. Hello, everybody in the Universal Hall, but also hello to everybody who's joining us from everywhere else. And it's nice just to take a moment, isn't it, to think about the reach of Findhorn and how the reach of Findhorn does really cover the whole world. That's one of the things I get to see on my travels. When I give talks in various places, I'll make a point of mentioning Findhorn. And there's always a few whoops in the crowd, and then, this great delight that Findhorn has been named, because Findhorn means so much to so many people, and it's touched us all in so many ways, hasn't it? And when I heard there was going to be a birthday celebration, I thought to myself, I know what I'd like to see. So this is it. This is what you're seeing tonight is very much what I wanted to see. Not the beginning, I have to be honest, not the beginning, the bit that's going to happen next. Not your beginning, Durton, no, yours was good. I like that. I want to say that, firstly, that this is a celebration. We're celebrating. And by the way, at the roots of most mystical traditions in this world, at the root of those mystical traditions was celebration. that we're here to celebrate the universe. We're here to celebrate each other. We're meant to be having a good time. So we're celebrating, and we're going to be celebrating, the founders, who are many, actually, seen and unseen. We're also really, this is a Thanksgiving. We're giving thanks for all of the people that have helped to create Findhorn and helped to work the story of Findhorn up until now. Yeah. It's also, I think, a time of affirmation. It's a time for us personally to really affirm what we believe in, what we know to be true, what we love, and what our purpose is in the world. What you're going to see over the next hour and a half or so is a feast, a spontaneous feast of storytelling. There will be readings, meditations, music, songs. This is a one-off. We're not doing a world tour. This is it. This is the one and only night this is ever going to happen. So this is a one-off. We haven't rehearsed anything, as you can probably tell. No rehearsals whatsoever. That's how confident we are that this is going to go really, really well. If you spot a mistake at any point in the evening, it's a real mistake. And not a fake one, not one that we rehearsed. It's like real, it's a genuine mistake. So that's good. And this is the bit from me before I hand over to our amazing cast. For me, I think the purpose of a birthday is to think about the original intention that comes with being born and with things being born into existence. And in particular, I would invite you to think about the mystical impulse that began here at Findhorn, that was recognized here in Findhorn. The mystical impulse is a curious thing. It exists in all of us. Mystics are not special types of people. Everybody is a special type of mystic. Everybody carries the mystical impulse within them. Everybody has a connection to the source of life that we all share. It took a whole universe to create each of us, and each of us comes from the universe. A mystic understands that you can never be separated from the love of God. It's impossible. You may think you are, you may believe you are, but you cannot be. And a mystic also recognizes that they are here through a play of light, and that each and every one of us is asked to shine our light somehow. In the past, we created buildings, temples, synagogues, churches as points of light, places where we would come, gather, worship, and remember who we are. I think in the future, more and more of us are going to have to be people of light, points of light, all over the planet, not housed in buildings, not this light in buildings, this light in our heart. I think that's how it's going to be. We have to help Findhorn, I think, remember the mystical impulse of how it was created. When we forget about the mystical impulse, whoever we are, we become a cold, damp church with a leaky roof that is in need of repair. When we forget about the mystical impulse, we become a closed community, grumpy, a bit miserable, cynical. Otto Rank, the great psychologist, said, we become cynical when we stop expressing our creativity. We only become pessimistic because we're not experiencing the mystical impulse. But as soon as we remember to come closer and to open the doors within, that mystical impulse is there. Almost every movement begins with a mystical impulse, and along the way the mystical impulse gets organized. And once it gets organized, it all becomes full of politics. And so every now and then what we have to do is just lightly drop the politics, return to the mystical impulse, and remember that this was all meant to be a play of love and a play of light. And hopefully by the end of the evening, all of us will feel the celebration, we'll feel the thanksgiving, and we'll feel the affirmation of all of that. And to start us off, we have Barbara and a wonderful choir to give us the first offering. Thank you.
Thank you, Robert. Robert, you speak from my heart when you talk about celebration and the mystical impulse. So this is not really a performance. This is for us all to root ourselves deeply in that impulse. So we're going to share and remember those words of our teacher and brother Jesus: when two or more are gathered together in my name, then there I am forever amongst you. I think Cornelia picked it as the theme song for the birthday. So I hope we'll all join in. And we have wonderful community singers here. They're just voices of the community, but help to fill the room. Sort of, let's just, as we're singing, become these conduits between heaven and earth, and know whenever two or more are gathered together in my name, there I am forever amongst you. When two or more are gathered together in my name, then there I am forever amongst you. When two or more are gathered together in my name, then there I am forever amongst you. This part of the room. When two or more are gathered together in my name, then there I am forever amongst you. Now you come in. When two or more are gathered together in my name, then there I am forever amongst you. When two or more are gathered together in my name, then there I am forever amongst you. When two or more are gathered together in my name, then there I am forever amongst you. When two or more are gathered together in my name, then there I am
Now I would like to invite Liza and Rosie to come and speak about ironing. It's not working. Good evening, everybody. My name's Robert Holden. Actually, I picked an angel card for this evening, and I got acceptance. This is the angel of the month. Thank you, Kathy. So, once again, to everybody, not just in the room, but also tuning in, I'm inviting Liza and Rosie to speak about Eileen Caddy. Thank you.
Thank you. Well, in 1974, when I first came here, my very first job was to go to the Caddy bungalow after sanctuary and clean it under the guidance of Eileen Caddy. And I came from South Africa, where I thought that all important people had cleaners. And it was only many years later that I heard that Eileen had a serious operation, and that was why she wasn't allowed to do it herself. But it was a great privilege for me to get to know her. And some years later, she asked me to help her write her autobiography, The Flight into Freedom. And it was a really extraordinary experience because I had to read every single bit of guidance that she'd ever written. And she used to have these little receipt books. And her writing was very small. And every single piece of guidance was dated. So I could read through and say, so Eileen, what happened on, 4th of November, 1968? And she'd say, I have no idea. So we'd read the guidance, and she'd say, oh yes, I remember, there was that really difficult girl, and da-da-da. And the guidance was telling her how to manage this really difficult girl. And it was, well, you just have to show love and understanding and just gently persuade her that actually she ought to get dressed for dinner, because that's showing respect for the cooks. And blow me down if the next day this girl didn't come in a dress that she'd made herself. So it's those kind of stories that, was just amazing. So the thing I wanted to really say about Eileen tonight is the thing I was most amazed by her is that she would listen to her guidance, she would read, and then she would change. She would work on herself to change her prejudices, her opinions, her anger, her resentments, all of those things. And then her voice, inner voice, would say, oh, well done, next lesson. And so I wanted to tell you about my experience of that. So Eileen and I went to South Africa together. And Eileen was a Virgo, and she was very, very precise. And everything had to be just so. And I'm a bit different. And so we were going to the airport together, and there was a knock on the door, and we'd overslept. And so we jumped in the car and dashed to the airport. It was total chaos. Got to South Africa, put Michael, my son, in with my brother and sister-in-law, and, I was going, oh. And we were staying with Catherine Ingalls, actually. And I came down for breakfast, sort of 8 o'clock-ish, quite sleepy. And I said, Liza, there's something I have to talk to you about. And I went, oh, God, here it comes. And she said, I had this guidance this morning. And the guidance said, if you are going to give workshops on the challenge of change, you need to start to change yourself. And I'd been encouraging her to do group discovery in the workshops and, this kind of stuff. She said, and I've been really resistant to your input. So from now on, we'll do as you suggest. And I nearly fainted. Then she said, and I got another piece of guidance about loving unconditionally. And it said, if you're going to give workshops on loving unconditionally, you have to start by loving Liza unconditionally. So she said, I'm very sorry that I've been so judgmental of you. And she did, she did. And, and then, of course I forgave her. And then those two things became the content of our workshops for the next 3 weeks. So I was quite privileged to be the example of how to love unconditionally. Anyway, Eileen was just amazing in her obedience to God's will, and she really worked on herself forever. So that's really what I wanted to share with you. And I do recommend this book. It matches.
Hello, everybody, and hello to everybody out there. So, yes, my experience with Eileen and met Eileen. She came into our group, and we discovered we had a shared Irish heritage, and from then on we really became good friends. And I worked in Findhorn Press when Opening Doors Within was coming out, and Eileen was buying books and sending them out to people all over the world. And then we also, through my work in outreach education, travelled also a bit together. I didn't have those sort of experiences. Publishers were publishing her books in different countries, so we went to Spain and Italy and different places, and also to Ireland together. But I really feel I had a great privilege of just sitting at her feet and learning so much from her. And what really struck me so much was this lived spirituality. She wasn't interested at all in the theory or opinions or anything, but how could she, and then how could we live the spiritual principles? Many people would write to her and tell her they got guidance, and she would go, so what, in a way, you know, what do you do about it? How do you live it? And that was her great down-to-earthness and just practical spirituality. That was her real gift, I think, that she gave to us. It was also that she could hear a voice. She was dedicated and disciplined to that voice. She had her appointment with God every day. She dressed up to have that, put on her lipstick. Liza and I have taken that on board, put on our lipstick, and she had her appointment with God. She was always punctual. And she also reckoned that if she could do it, humble as she was, we could all do it. And I think that's been her great legacy, that it's up to all of us now. This is God's community, she would talk about. And she would also say, if you're here for just community or for a workshop center or for whatever, then, you know, really challenge that, question that. Is this still your place? You know, if you're here to do the inner listening and live the spiritual principles, then of course it's up to all of us, and that's how we go forward. She was gracious. There was so much I learned from her, and I have so much more to say. I put bullet points down, but one of the key spiritual pieces of guidance for me was her message: love where you are, love who you're with, and love what you're doing. And I think that's our work today. Well, we had, yes, Liza was, we had lots of conversations about everything, and but particularly about death. That was I was fascinated, like what would happen, and she was, she just had no fear. And I know it's been said that she had was ready and all of that. She was. But there was just that she had absolutely no fear. So I feel, when I was tuning in for tonight, that, her presence is definitely here. And, she does say at some point, you can call on me, you can talk to me at any time. And I do a lot. So Yeah. Thank you. I think we're within the... I think we kept it in.
Would you like one of
Yes,
those?
thank you. I'd love. How's that? Dare I say anything? Yes? Good. Okay. You're not messing around with me, are you? You did hear that, didn't you? Yeah. Actually, just one of the most favorite things for me to do as soon as I get here is go to the garden and I just sit on that bench and I literally just imagine Eileen sitting there, Dorothy sitting there with me. Just that feeling of just being in the presence and feeling like you can't call upon these people. It's a lovely thing. Thank you so much for what you shared. So now I would like to invite Jonathan and Roger to come and share some reflections on Peter Caddy. Thank you.
Well, the ladies put the lipstick on, we put the jackets on, all right?
Absolutely.
Yeah. Are you talking? You got that there? Yeah. It's a privilege to be here and to be, well, I've been a witness to so much of what's gone on here. Having been born in that caravan there and moved here on the 17th of November, but a witness to my parents, and I'm going to talk about my father, because, well, I wouldn't be here, and none of you would be here without my father. And a lot is talked about my mother because she was here longer in this community. My father left in 1979. And but without him actually putting the visions and the words into practice in what actually developed in this place, I think we have to go back and we do, Robert, have to remember the essence of this place, because it was actually quite a simple experiment in some ways. It was 4 people that came here, plus 6 children. There was 10 of us to start with, that came here, and they wanted to live by spirit, by going inside and following that spirit, that voice. And yes, all right, the press loved it because they didn't have a name, so they called them the nameless ones. And, they wanted to create a story out of it. But actually, this community, right at the beginning, it was a simple process. And out of that seed, we have this magnificent legacy that we are all living and involved with. So, but without my father putting things into the physical, this hall definitely wouldn't be here, but so many other things wouldn't be here. And in terms of his qualities, he was a great leader, but not because of his ego. Actually, it was because he actually didn't put himself first. He put the bigger, the bigger plan in there. So he didn't ask things out of wanting to do things for him, for the aggrandizement of any individual, but for the greater good. He was someone that loved life, a lot of physical energy, and he was a hard act to follow. I've always said that. Very difficult because he saw things in such a positive way, and I suppose my life has been a little bit different, and maybe yours has too. But he certainly was a wonderful pioneer here. I don't know how he would live in this community now, Roger, but anyway. So I know him as his son, and I would normally have my brothers here, but they're not here at this particular juncture for various reasons. But we've got Roger to have a little talk about my dad.
Can you all hear me? Great. I hitchhiked up from London and arrived the summer of 1970 as a 19-year-old young man, and embraced fully by Peter and Eileen Dorothy and the fledgling community that was here, and then stayed for that 7 weeks and then came back in 1971. And I just want to tell you about the qualities that Peter had and how they affected me. Because Peter had an element of mysticism for sure, but it was mysticism in action. He saw himself in the action and the deed of doing something and acting from that greater wholeness. And he was a manifester. He had abundance. Nothing was impossible. He had the confidence. And in that confidence, everyone around him had a sense of security. There was safety. So in those early days, he provided safety for everyone. And, we talk about work as love in action. For Peter, it was to give your very best and have an element of perfection. Not in the end result, but just to really work hard and give it your best. I had to rebuild a fence 3 times. Seriously. Peter would come by, and because it wasn't straight or something wasn't quite right with it, I never quibbled about that. That's just how things were. But Peter was not an authority in and of himself. There was the higher authority. And if one could understand that and have a relationship to that higher authority functioning through Peter, he was a loving, caring, empowering man. And really inside, he was a teddy bear. You had this exterior self, his military background, the way that he dressed, the way that he came across. But he was an enabler, particularly for the younger people who lived there at the time. He was a mentor, a wonderful a model of getting something done, decisive, and his leadership was to see the best in people and to draw that out. He wasn't imposing or micromanaging or telling people what to do. He truly drew out the highest in people because he knew how to inspire. And that inspiration was that mystical element because he was very much in touch with that deeper part of himself and what he was calling in to make Findhorn a center of light, a demonstration of abundance, and the manifestation of a new world that he was so committed and dedicated to work towards, as were all of those founders. And I'm very indebted to him. In fact, Peter, come over here. I just want to tell you from me, you died very quickly, but we all have to provide some gratitude and appreciation for who you are and what you did for this place. I mean, really. And for the many people who have been influenced positively by you. And I'm certainly one of them. So thank you, Peter. Yeah. We're going to leave it with that. Jonathan was a little scrawny kid when I...
And he wasn't much better.
Thank you, gentlemen. And so now I'd like Barbara and the choir to come back. Thank you.
So this next song is just an homage and a rendering to the principles that Peter, Eileen, and Dorothy lived. Listening beyond the chatter in the mind, listening to the silence, to the place we find the oneness with the one in all. So we're going to start with you and then you do it.
Listen to the silence in your mind. Listen to the silence inside. All things reflect the one in all. When you listen to the silence in your mind, listen to the silence in your mind. Listen to the silence inside. All things reflect the one in all. When you listen to the silence in your mind, listen to the silence in your mind. Listen to the silence inside. All things reflect the one in all. When you listen to the silence in your mind, listen to the silence in your mind. Listen to the silence inside. All things reflect the one in all. When you listen to the silence in your mind, when you listen to the silence in your mind, when you listen to the silence in your mind.
So this isn't just spiritual entertainment tonight. Yeah, let's take a moment to do just what you've invited us to do properly. Let's all of us welcome the silence. And let's all of us, each in our own way, just enter into that silence, a space that has been lovingly prepared for us. And let's just listen for a moment and see what the silence would most like us to know. Thank you. And now I'd like to invite John and Judy to talk about Dear Dorothy.
Good evening, everyone. I first met Dorothy over 50 years ago in 1967. She was a beautiful, light-filled being with sparkling eyes. And in the early days, she was very much aware of what was happening because she'd been very thoroughly trained by Sheena, as had Peter and Eileen for many years. She often claimed that Findhorn really began in 1952, and there was a 10-year gestation period before they arrived here at Findhorn. And early in their time in the caravan, she lived in the annex of the original caravan, very small space. Within the first 18 months, she started connecting with the Davic world. And the first Deva was the garden pea, which was her favourite vegetable. And she got many messages. One of them was to encourage humans to be grateful for the food they ate, not just take it for granted. She got messages to help Peter with the gardening. And the garden flourished. There really were big cabbages when I showed up. And we ate mostly from the garden that had been created over those first 3 years. Dorothy was the first beekeeper here at Findhorn. Jonathan and I used to watch in awe as she cared for the bees and extracted the honey. And she always wore a little bee in her lapel. And he and I have continued this practice ever since. They're a very important part of the early days of Findhorn, as were the worms, the first workers. Dorothy was quite a shy person in the early days when I knew her. She wouldn't talk to more than 2 or 3 people at a time. And it wasn't till she moved to North America with what became the Lorien Group that I think, particularly with David and Myrtle, they drew her out, and eventually, as we all know, she became a global teacher and shared her stories for decades, well into her 80s. She came back to Findhorn in 2009 and had work to complete. And I was privileged to be one of her carers, and we used to have many adventures together. I remember one afternoon we ended up in a cafe along the coast, Fochabers, and as we came out, we met an elderly gentleman, and they stopped and looked at each other. And when Dorothy was the receptionist at Cluny Hill, way back in the late 50s, the hotel was closed in the winter from October through to Easter. So she took a winter job, and she was the secretary to Gordon Baxter, who headed Baxter Foods. And then they lost touch, and they reconnected after this 50-plus years, and it was like a reunion of brother and sister. It was a very beautiful thing to behold. He invited us for lunch, and we had he and his wife over for afternoon tea, and yeah, he'd really appreciated the time that she'd worked for him. To me, Dorothy embodied the light and the love, which to me was wisdom. She loved to be in nature. We spent a lot of time listening to the waves, walking along the river, being in the trees. And yeah, I want to thank you, Dorothy, for your mentoringship and your love. We connect each morning when I'm on the beach, and it's a very special time for me. Judy.
Thanks, John. I didn't know Dorothy nearly as long as John did. When I arrived in the community, they had just celebrated their 15th birthday. And so Dorothy was somebody that I heard stories about because she had already left. And starting in the 90s, she started coming back and doing workshops, and she would meet with various groups and stuff. And I started asking her when we were going to get her biography of Findhorn, because we had Peter's and we had Eileen's. And every year she would say, I'm working on it. And after nearly a decade, one day, I think to sort of shut me up and get me to stop asking, she looked at me and she said, when you come and help me write it. What she didn't know is that I had a sabbatical period coming up. So I just looked at her and said, okay, name the date. And that's kind of how it really began for her and I. And a little bit like Liza, as we worked on the book, I discovered underneath her desk this pile of papers and old file folders and folders full of old transparency rice paper that were carbon copies of typewritten messages. And when I asked her what it was, she said, oh, that's just the old guidance. And I asked her permission to read it. And she couldn't, she was a bit like, what? Why would you want to do that? But she said yes. So just as Liza did with Eileen, I had the opportunity to just read about 50 years of guidance, just a few pages every day. And I started asking her questions about, well, what was this about and what was that about? And she didn't think people would be interested in how she felt or thought about the things that she had lived through. And she kept saying, people aren't going to be interested in that and that and that. So it took a while to convince her to write some of the stories that in the end she did. For me, she was the epitome of dedication and commitment and integrity. And she used to talk about how those early days for her were an experiment in living life with God at the center. If you put spirit in the center of your life in all things, then what happens? And very interesting things happened. But what I most loved about her, there were two things I particularly respected. One was her sense of humor. She had an absolutely wicked sense of humor, and her ability to turn a pun or make a wry comment was just par excellence. And I think it's a part of her that not necessarily people really got the privilege or honor of seeing. And the other thing was her courage, because as John said, she was an extremely shy person. She actually told me a story once of literally having to be carried off a stage because she literally froze in a debate. She was part of a debating team and she just literally froze and had to be carried off. So wanting to be a public speaker was never anything she planned on, but it was another example of a place where she was asked to do something, and so she took it up and became a teacher and traveled. I want to tell a story that embodies a different kind of courage. She and I were invited, she was invited to go to Thailand. She was like 84 years old at that point, and we'd been traveling for about 3 or 4 weeks, and were invited to this little center down in the south. And it was quite a trek, and we walked through a rubber plantation, and we finally got there. And we were told there was a river that we needed to cross, but there was a bridge. And we got there, and the river was about the width of the hall there, and the bridge consisted of 2 trunks, about that big. Dorothy paled. The organizer noticed that she paled and said, oh, well, there's another way that we can get there, but, we'll have to go back to the car and drive and da-da-da-da-da. So off we went, because Dorothy was not going to cross this bridge. One of the other things people don't know a lot about her is that she didn't really like heights very much. The road was washed out, so we had to come back to the bridge. And Dorothy took a deep breath and she said, no. we'll walk across the river. So she and I waded across the river. It never got higher than about, chest deep, waded across. And the people on the other side were just like beside themselves because there was this 85-year-old lady who was walking through the river. We stayed there that night and it poured with rain. The whole night it poured. And the next morning our organizer said, I think you're going to have to leave. This isn't going to work, this particular location, because by that time it got very muddy and da-da-da-da. So that meant we had to go across the bridge again. And they said, you're going to have to go across the bridge, Dorothy, because the river has come way, way up and there's no way we can, walk across it. It was an interesting next 15 or 20 minutes while she geared herself up. We got there and they had put a rope at least above the two poles. And when we stood, she just stood there and these two very handsome, strapping men offered to assist her, at which point her eyes lit up. She was very appreciative of male beauty, actually, in her lifetime. And so she, they each took one in front and one behind, and she shuffled across these two logs, hanging on to the wood for dear life, the rope, got to the other side and kind of peeled her fingers off the rope and came to the other side. And for me, that for me was an absolute epitome of the kind of courage that she demonstrated her whole life on all levels. The courage to just do what needed to be done, to follow that inner direction, because she'd said yes to doing this traveling, so she would say yes to whatever else we had to do. So, I miss her a lot. Okay.
I remember asking her once, how do you get that light in your eyes like that, Dorothy? And she went, oh, I don't know. And then she said, I gave my mind to God a long time ago. Might be something to do with it. Indeed, yes. This is very lovely, isn't it? It's good to be doing this. Yeah. Listening to these ordinary mystics who were doing extraordinary things. And so now we're going to hear about Lena, and I'd like to invite Ruth and Jonathan and Richard to come and share some thoughts. Thank you.
Yes.
Yeah.
Recognize the
Okay, I'll sit down.
come along. It's just helping to set the scene for what's following.
all think you know. Oh, this is working. Yeah. Yeah. You all think you know the story of this place, but there are stories and there's other stories. And one of the things is that instead of 3 people finding this place, it was actually 4. And we have Ruth, we have the privilege of Ruth Lamont. It was Ruth's mother, what was that 4th person that came here in 1962. And in a way, well, has been her choice really to be written out of the story. And that is partly because she had been living on Tiree in the Western Isles. She came from Skye. Yes, she did not want the backlash from these more traditional communities as to what, the life that she had been living here. So I've got a privilege to have Ruth here, who's the daughter, and I've known Ruth all my life. And we also have the Reverend Richard Fraser, who's going to just tell a little bit about your mother, yes, too. So I'm going to be asking Ruth a few questions. And we're just going to have a little conversation here. We've actually, it's great to have a celebration like this because it allows certain things to happen. And one of them is that we actually got on the phone and had a very long blether together. Blether is just going on and on about different things. No, it's like when your parents die, you think, oh, I wish I'd asked about this, that, and the other thing. Well, this gave us the opportunity to ask about, our parents and our upbringing and so on. And we can't tell you all about those things, but we can give you little snippets there. So, Ruth, yes, can you just tell me a little bit about your mother, first of all, just her upbringing and, yeah.
Is this working? Yes, it is. Excuse my croaky voice. I'm in the same boat as Durton here. My mother was born in the Isle of Skye and brought up there. And she was a clever girl at Portree High School. And she was accepted to study agriculture, but she chose to join the civil service. And then she got married. And she was living in Glasgow at that time.
Yeah, so yes, and we have known each other for a long time. How did our families meet?
Well, I think it was in 1956 when your father was doing his clean, easy brush sales job.
Yes, that was one of his, yeah.
It's one of his many talents.
Exactly. I forgot to mention that when, when I was talking about him.
And he came as a lodger to my grandmother's house in the West End of Glasgow. And he was a very good lodger, very tidy, well-educated, polite, and so on. And they liked having him. And he liked to go in and join them in the large kitchen there and make conversation and sometimes they even used to pray together, I believe. So, and then he went on his way to do other things. I'm not quite sure what, but he was to return, I think, some months later.
And how did yes, Sheena actually visited Glasgow as well. Sheena, most of you will know that Sheena was my mother, my father's, Dorothy's, and also Lena's spiritual teacher. And how did?
Well, Sheena turned up, I think, one night at the house, and it was a terrible night, very foul weather, and my mother invited her in, and took her to the kitchen, and she warmed herself by the kitchen range, and my mother gave her soup, and they got chatting. And Sheena was the daughter of George Govan of the Evangelical Faith Mission, so she knew the Highlands and Islands well, because the Faith Mission evangelized there. And so my mother and Sheena must have had common ground because, you know, here was somebody that knew my mother's culture and so on. And also on that night, my mother said that Sheena sang a Gaelic lament, Grickel Chria, which is for one of the McGregors. It's a very powerful Gaelic lament. And I think that really captivated my mother. And so they were very taken with Sheena.
And yes, I mean, we arrived here. What were we doing? What were we doing 60 years ago, Ruth? Where were you?
Well, 60 years ago, you were in the original caravan at the Sands caravan site.
Oh, that's right. We weren't here at all. We were down in the summer site at Findhorn.
And we were still at the Trossachs. We stayed on a bit after your parents left the Trossachs Hotel, and then your dad came and collected us. And I remember that drive on that, you know, a night probably like tonight, you know, up the twisty roads. And I thought we were coming back to live in the village because your father had moved from Glasgow to Cluny Hill to manage the hotel, and we'd lived in the village. We followed from Glasgow. So it was a sort of return to Findhorn, but not the Findhorn of the village that I knew when I was a toddler. It was this grassy hollow, and we're in a caravan, and you're in the caravan next door. And that space you see today with the stone seats is where our caravan was.
That's right, that's where your caravan was. And yes, because your family, that's your two brothers and yourself and your mother were with us in Cluny for the 5 years there, and then the Trossachs Hotel, and then came to be part of the experiment here. And, you know, as I said, talked about my dad, this experiment in, you know, how to listen to the voice of spirit and to live by that. Sounds simple, doesn't it?
Yes, I think in Glasgow my mum had joined in the various activities with Sheena and your mother, and sitting down and being still and turning within and all these kind of phrases that you'll all be familiar with. And, you know, they would turn in and tune into, you know, the network of light, you know, as they called it, and sending love and light around the globe and beyond to the cosmos and that sort of thing.
Yeah, because we had that caravan up where the sanctuary was. That was Naomi's caravan. That was where they used to go for their peace.
Yes,
and
peace from us.
Yeah, peace from. Is that what? Well, maybe it was. Maybe it was. Yes. But yes, where the globe was, you know, there's these mysterious things that went on. Well, actually, it wasn't mysterious for us because it was just how we were being brought up.
Yes, I heard Caroline Mace use the term the internet.
The internet,
and
right,
I thought
the
that
internet
summed it up. We didn't have the internet, we didn't have phones, so.
That inner connection, using that inner connection with different groups, different centers of light in the world. I mean, it's quite yes. It seems it was different. It is, and
And in terms of, you know, living in those conditions, I mean, there are plenty of other people in the caravan park living there in the same way, but you know, it was tough going, and when the going got tough, the tough got going. But my mother, coming from a crofting background, was kind of, I think, used to adversity. She'd grown up in a thatched cottage, a stone cottage, one room, and then maybe a wall and the animals next door, and a small patch of land to grow some crops and vegetables and so on. So I think she adapted quite well to that hardship. So
yeah, I mean, it was interesting to hear you know, from Judy there about Dorothy being shy, and your mother was incredibly...
yes, she was 10 times more shy than Dorothy.
Exactly, yes, and in some way it was quite challenging to start to have this community that was building around, I would imagine, for her.
Yes, and when we moved up to Pine Ridge, as we were all getting older, you moved to a bungalow, a mobile home, which seemed very luxurious.
It was,
We moved up to the euphemistically named Rose Cottage, which was actually the old RAF mess house, and very cold up at Pine Ridge, and it was very bleak. And I think my mum felt the move up there, you know, away from the sort of coziness of what we called the Hollow, that now has become well known as the Findhorn Garden, was, you know, she missed that coziness and the small group. And Dorothy once said, you know, she joined in as much as her natural shyness permitted, but she was just a shy person.
Yeah, I mean, I think it's a privilege to have you here, just to talk about your mother, and to tell a bit more of the real story.
Yes.
Yeah.
Well, it's a privilege for me to be here, and so thank you very much all for inviting me. And I'm doing a bit of time traveling while I'm here, thinking of it then and now, and none of this was here.
Absolutely.
So
yeah, it's. I think we both have the privilege of being a witness to so much of the, you know, the physical change that has happened here, but also the many tens of thousands of people that have actually passed through and benefited from this point. And Richard, yes, maybe you want to talk to what maybe Richard is going to...
We were talking about mysticism and how to explain and what, and maybe it's a bit inexplicable, but I'm very pleased to have our friend Richard here, who did the service for my mum when she took her last journey, and had some really beautiful words on Lena's mystical nature or experience.
Well, okay, Ruth, it was a real privilege to speak with you and to, you know, prepare for your mother's funeral. And what we agreed to do was that I would read some of the words that I prepared with Ruth's help at Lena's funeral just over a year ago. I feel a bit of an intruder here, but I've known Ruth for well over 20 years. But I've also known Findhorn for even longer, because I've been coming here for the last 35 years. My family have a house here, and ultimately, when I finally retire, my wife and I will end up living here, which will be really fantastic, because I've always felt this extraordinary connection, and it is a privilege to be here tonight and hear about this mystical quality, because as a Church of Scotland minister at Greyfriars Kirk in the heart of Edinburgh, I sometimes feel about our tradition that we have had so many springs blocked up by our tradition. And this is a real privilege to hear about the freedom of the Spirit in this place. So this is part of what I
Yes.
last year.
Great.
There's a mystical side to Gaelic culture that has at times been suppressed by the more dominant Reformed Christian theology that has found a home in parts of the Western Isles. At times, that dominant culture has proved to be less than tolerant of alternative spiritual paths. But what appeared to arise in Lena was a deep and resonant spirituality that was not always conventional, but drew deeply on that ancient Gaelic culture and heritage. One thing that came across in talking to Ruth was her deep love for Gaelic language and culture, and of Cianalas, a longing to be home. But through her mystical sensitivity, it's perhaps the case that these words of George Bain that meant a great deal to her, which Ruth shared, have a more profound truth than just a longing to be home in the Isle of Skye. And these words from George are, "May your steps return from all corners of the globe under the guidance of the star that points to home." And I think home here refers to the very heart of God. So today, whatever faith tradition we're part of, if we are part of one at all, we're learning the wisdom that people like Lena knew long ago, that reverence for the land and the natural world, and the conservation, nurturing, and preservation of what is left of this fragile and beautiful earth is perhaps our greatest vocation and privilege. Her husband said once to Ruth, "I lost a lot when I lost Lena." And indeed, now that she's lost to the world, perhaps even more than in her own lifetime, her wisdom, her passion, and her profound and sincere spirituality will arise more deeply amongst those whom she touched and influenced throughout her life. And there's a phrase that Ruth has used several times when we talked in relation to her mother, one that Lena's used as a reassurance to others: "You'll see my light." Perhaps more than ever in her passing, we will see her light still, as we revolve memories of those whom she touched in her life. And she has gone to that greater light, and we can only trust that she has been awoken to that mysterious light that lies beyond life.
Thank you.
And so now, once again, I'd like to invite Barbara and the choir.
So now we're going to have our real community anthem that I hope you will join in. We want to all sing together, "I Dream a Dream." And I hope we'll have the words somewhere. And just also I want to acknowledge my beautiful singers. Thank you for rallying at short notice. We have Thomas on the bass, and David on tenor, and Marit on alto, and Hannah on soprano. So thank you very much. So, yay! So the way we'll do it is we'll have the first verse sung, and then we'll all join in to sing all three verses. And I'm hoping that the words will appear as they are needed. Yay!
Gentle and mild, where the trees stand in silence, yet singing their song in natural harmony, where the earth freely gives to nurture all life, and creation is boundless and free. I dreamed a dream a long time ago about a land where rivers run wild, where flowers grow wherever they choose, and the breezes flow gentle and mild, where the trees stand in silence yet singing their song. Harmony.
Thank you, thank you. Moving right along, I would like to invite Craig to come and tell some stories about rock.
I can't sit in one of those armchairs. I find them finding. Oh, sorry, I can't sit in an armchair, but something else can. I don't know what I'm doing. Thank you, Durden, for modelling what's coming. This is Rock's hat. It's too big for me. I can't wear it. I don't know how I came by it. I'm placing it here because I'd like it to go on an adventure with anyone who chooses over the next few days to take it and wear it and pass it on to someone else, and then pass it on to someone else. And I'm trusting by the end of the week it'll return. And if it doesn't, that's okay. Just as Jonathan, I think, was wearing his father's jacket. Is that right, Jonathan? Yes. This is something, what do we do with it? And where does it wear? So that's Rock's hat. And I'd love it to go around and around and around. And if you receive it, don't hold on to it for hours. Put it on, walk it around, and give it to the next head. But tell them it's got to come back on Friday. This is... Who is this? Does anybody know who this is? No, nobody knows who this is. And I'm not sure if I know who it is either. But there was a wonderful woman here in the 70s called Jenny Walker. And if any of you have seen a video called the Magnus Magnusson program, which I think you all have, and I'm in that, but that's not about me. Rock talked of Kumus, and Kumus was, actually he didn't talk about it in that video, but anyway, Kumus, he talked of Kumus as a young faun dancing in front of him in the botanical gardens in, yeah, wherever it was. Here he is, by Jenny Walker. And I don't know how I came across it either, but it's there. So there's this little impish Mickey person, which sometimes I feel a little bit like. And it's really difficult to stand here and talk about Rock because I don't know really who he was. I've had some personal experiences with him, but I'm a bastard from the bush. I'm an Australian. I'm coming out of a background that is so radically different than Rock's reality, and he mine. I first met him as a half-starved, retreating yogi in Sammy Ling in 1967 with Peter Caddy. I was there recovering from cancer, shattered with cobalt, and God had been blasted into infinity through psychedelics in the early 60s. So he is this other cultured person, and I am this person who is in a state of recovery, or no, recovery. And I'm working there with a couple of lamas who had just started the place. And these two English gentlemen walked in, and they were dressed in these tweed coats and whatever they call vests and ties and polished shoes. And I looked at them and was fascinated by these characters. And later I asked a friend who said, I said to him, I said, who were they? And they said, oh, that's Rock, Ogilvy Crombie and Peter Caddy. And I said, well, what are they doing here in a Buddhist center? And he says, I don't know, but they come from a, a Western mystery school in the north of Scotland. And I sort of looked at him puzzled, saying, Western mystery school, what's that? There's no such thing. There's only mystery school somewhere up in the Himalayas, which I had spent a bit of time looking for. And I said, oh, well, I've got to go and look at this place. So in '68, I turned up looking for these gentlemen in this place. And I find a derelict military base. And a little hollow with a garden in it, and a newly built garage which was converted into a sanctuary. So I'm still trying to put all these, I'm emotional because I'm still trying to put all these things together to this day. And I walked into this, shack. It had plasterboard on the inside and was pretty rough. And I sat down. It happened. My heart opened. Before that, I never knew what it was. And it was very big. So I stayed. Of course, all the other stories about the founders. And I've stayed until this day. And I'm still trying to discover this and that. Rock was a remarkable person. I stayed with him in London. Not London, in Edinburgh. He was a gentle man. And I worked with him a little bit. We used to walk around the park in those days, and Rock was always trying to create a very clear protective radiance around this tiny little community with the intention of allowing it to grow. And it was always getting bigger and bigger. And every now and then, Rock would find some type of creation by many of us who were doing things in the vicinity, and he'd come along and ask me to take it away. So I would be cleaning up all of these wonderful little moments of people's creativity and putting them aside. Another time, we used to go off with Peter on the weekends, and the whole community at that point, and go and visit different sacred points. And we would go over to a mountain called Morven. It's on this ley line that runs through here, across on the other side of the bay. And we all, Jonathan, by the way, at that point, we used to call him Tigger, a much younger man, and he'd run up to the top of the mountain and run down again, and everybody else was doing this, and Jonathan had run up again. So anyway, we're all going up to this sacred power point, and Rock goes off over onto another little hill. And I'm watching this and that. So I walk over to Rock and I say, why aren't you going up there? And he says, well, it's not up there, it's here. What would be another story of Rock? Because he was a many-colored personality. This little garage, which was a sanctuary, eventually they put his grand piano, I think it was his, wasn't it? Anyway, there was a grand piano in one corner, and in another corner was this brand new console of a sort of a record player, and you had to put proper records in it and put them down. And the sanctuary was sacred, right? Sacred. But some of us had experienced the 60s, and we liked different kinds of music. And some of us put on some music, and one of them was by Santana. And it was called Black Magic Woman. We were told we shouldn't play music like that in the sanctuary. And then we tried Pink Floyd, Dark Side of the Moon. No dark side of the moon in the sanctuary. Oh dear. What other little... There was a play in these early days with these paradoxes, I mean not paradoxes, but polarities. And I have to say for myself, God doesn't exist, and I hear God a lot. And I'm coming into this community where God spoke to me, and there's this whole strong sort of ethos. And there's another part of me which is going, but it doesn't matter what it's called. And I think in a way that's what rock taught me. It doesn't matter what it's called. And it's what Peter did. It's the spirit in which you engage. Yeah, there's so many stories and so many multiple realities coming together in this place that even today, for me, it's mind-boggling how we have created. And I'm looking at all my old buddies out here, and I know that we all come from these backgrounds, and yet we're still searching, or like that beautiful song that was just there. That's where I come to these places. I actually think that's enough right now, because all I can say is thank you, Rock, thank you, Peter, Eileen, Dorothy, Sheena, and everyone, and thank you all, because this is what we are. This is who I am. Don't forget.
Roger, I think you should wear this hat first. So Roger, come up here, and Mary, please come up too. Actually, we can keep it there. How would you like? You go there, and I'll put that there. Okay. Tell us what's going to happen next.
David Spangler. So I'm going to say a few words about David, and then Mary's going to continue. When I arrived in 1970, I was shown around the very small community with David Spangler and his friend Myrtle Glines, and I can remember being squeezed into the original caravan and how polite David was in trying to squeeze past me. David, if you're listening, that was quite a memory. But David very much was a teacher, a writer, and someone who helped ground some of the early spiritual teachings at Findhorn in 1970, 71, 72, 73. In the park building was where a lot of the early educational design took place. There were meetings there. David would talk. There were exchanges. David and his wife, who became his wife, Julie, Malinka Matanovich, Patty Lightstone, who you just saw the words, Locke Bateau, were all part of the New Troubadours. So the New Troubadours was very much a part of that time. And from those sort of educational interactions, the Lorien Association began to be formed, and in the United States in 1975, it was incorporated as a non-profit organization there. And Lorien still exists today. I want to just say one thing about David. He's a remarkable individual, and with his wife, Julie, and his 4 kids, and a granddaughter. You know, they live outside of Seattle, and their home is such a hotbed of hospitality and genuine caring for people. It truly is. And so when it comes to this embodiment of spirit in everyday life, You know, David, to me, is an exponent of that. And I've known David for 51 years. I mean, he's a true friend, and he's a friend to many people. And he's just a wonderful individual, and he continues to this day, teaching and writing and being an inspirer to many. So Mary, how about you?
I first came across David in 1972, when my mother and I visited the community for just a day. David was living here. We didn't meet him at that time, but we went away with a lot of the like pamphlets and little booklets that there was the original Findhorn Garden sections on, you know, about like 20 pages in them, that sort of thing. And one of them was something by David called The Vision of Findhorn in World Transformation. And it had a profound effect on me, as did the other ones, other papers as well. There was something about the promise and potential of what humanity was here for. And not just humanity in general, that was partly that, but also in every individual human as well. It was extremely inspiring. I came back the following year to live. By then, David, who'd spent 3 years here, had left. And over the winter of 73, 74, there were almost daily what we called college classes, like 4:30 in the afternoon after most of us had stopped working. We would have these different classes, and at least once a week, these involved listening to taped talks that David had given while he lived here. David had a very soporific voice at that point. And after a few minutes, most of us had fallen asleep. But we were informed by people who we assumed knew that we actually were absorbing it all subliminally. I also worked in the publications department, and I transcribed and typed out a lot of David's talks into study papers and into books. And I like to say that I absorbed his teachings at the time through my fingertips. And essentially, I've followed David's work ever since, as he has deepened his own exploration into what we're here for and humanity's relationship with the earth and the interdependence of everything, and, you know, together with his subtle colleagues. And as Roger says, he has this huge body of writing and work. And one of his books is called Memoirs of an Ordinary Mystic. And I think that is really key. There's something about, he's developed what he's called incarnational spirituality. You know, how do we, each of us, live the huge vision and bring the vastness of spirit, of whatever, of life, of the sacred, into the specifics of our everyday life together. I no longer fall asleep in his talks, and we are now going to have him for a few minutes talking to us here. And please don't fall asleep.
Thank you. David, where are you?
Hello, everybody. It's after you've heard all the stories of the founders, I feel very privileged to be here as part of this celebration. You know, where Findhorn is concerned, it's a center that's very close to my heart. But I'm really a David come lately. This place that you're celebrating had begun and was well underway when I came there. You know, there's so many people have their own miraculous stories about how they came to Findhorn. And that was true for me too. I'd first heard about Findhorn from Anthony Brooks, who, with his partner, Monica Parrish, had the, the foundation bungalow there in the community. And Anthony went around the world giving these illustrated lectures with slides from various centers that he had visited. And part of those lectures was his sharing about what was happening at Findhorn. And at the time, I was, interestingly enough, teaching an adult education course for the San Jose Public Adult Education Program on spirituality and the future of humanity. And the story of Findhorn and the work with the intelligence of nature and Dorothy's work and Eileen's connection, all of that was terribly inspiring. And I would bring this material that Anthony had left with me to that class and sort of was proselytizing Findhorn a bit, even though I'd never been there. And I didn't really expect to ever be there. And that was probably in 67, 68. But in 1970, my own inner contact, whom I had called John, said, well, you have a new cycle of work that's about to begin, and it will take place in Europe. And this is what you need to look for. And in the particular kind of communication that we had, he showed me what I would describe as an energy field. You know, he didn't say, you know, go to Scotland or go to Europe or go to London. He just said, this is the energy that I want you to look for. And I had a very close friend at the time who would go to London every year. And she said to me and to my partner, Myrtle Glines, I'd like you to accompany us. She was an elderly woman in her 80s, very wealthy. And she said, I'll pay all your expenses and you come with me to London. So we did in the summer of 1970. And I thought, well, this is an opportunity to go up to Findhorn. I'd heard about it, of course, as I said, and I'd like to see this place for myself. A number of people whom I met then down in London said, oh no, you don't want to go to Findhorn. That's a place run by charlatans and would-be psychics, and there's a bunch of old ladies up there sitting on the beach talking to these little fairies, and you know, it's not what you want to get involved with. But I had this strong inner sense that I needed to go up. So I phoned Peter, and he said, oh, come right up. So Myrtle and I took the train up and arrived in the morning. It was an overnight train. And the one thing I remember is getting off the train and suddenly being embraced by this huge sweater, which was worn by Peter Caddy. He just came up and gave me a bear hug. And that was my introduction to Peter. So he piled us into the car and off we went to Findhorn. And when the car came through the entrance to the trailer park and went up to where the bungalows were, there it was. There was this energy field that I'd been told to look for. And I honestly did not expect to find it there. But I remember saying to Myrtle, this is the place that John says I'm supposed to do some work. This is the next cycle of work for me, because I'd been teaching for 5 years in the States, and this was my next assignment, so to speak. So I'd been at Findhorn for about 3 days, met Peter, met Eileen, met Dorothy. And then Peter came and said, I'd like you to come for tea with Eileen and me. So I said, that would be wonderful. I'd love to do that. So Myrtle and I went and had tea. with Peter and Eileen, and we talked about Findhorn. And then he said, that's when he dropped his bombshell, and he said, David, Eileen had a vision 3 years ago that you were coming. And I had written a little book about the Christ for my classes back in California. And a woman in the classes had mailed that little booklet to Findhorn, totally unbeknownst to me. And Dorothy had read it and then given it to Eileen, and Eileen had read it. And after she finished reading it, she had one of her visions. And in the vision, she was told that David Spangler is going to come to the community and be part of the leadership in the community. And she had no idea who I was or even where I was. So for 3 years, they'd been expecting me to arrive, and then I did. And Peter said, David, I'd like you to be my co-director. And I said, yes. Not really knowing what I was saying yes to, but knowing inwardly that this was obviously a situation that had been set up by forces much greater than myself. And what else could I say? So listening to the stories of the founders, something that I appreciated up to a point then, because there was no question that Eileen and Dorothy and Peter were remarkable people. Rock was an incredible man. Everything Craig said, a gentleman, but a man with truly awesome inner awareness and powers. And excuse me. And I felt all these people as my family. And I felt that we'd known each other in other lives. And it was there that, as Roger just said, I met the other friends, my heart friends and soul friends. Because when I arrived, Findhorn was only about 15 members and a lot of guests. But within a year, it had expanded to around 150 members. And it had grown beyond Peter's capacity to administer it. So a group of us formed an administrative cadre of people to help him out. And it was this group that of people that later, when we left, became the Lorien Association. So obviously there was a lot of deep soul connection, heart ties. But it wasn't until I left and I began traveling around the United States, visiting other communities and talking with other people who were either wanting to lead communities or were doing so, but not very successfully, that I fully appreciated the gift that Findhorn had in the men and women who had been its founders, who were its founders. As Roger said about Peter, he was somebody who did not put himself first. He used to say, I have no personality, and those of us who knew him knew quite well that he did, but he did not have an ego in the sense that he never tried to draw power to himself. He was, as Roger said, very empowering. And Eileen was that way, Dorothy was that way, because they genuinely were filled with the love of the sacred, with their experiences of God, the God within them and the God within all things. And Dorothy was enchanted, really, by her connection with the intelligences within nature, the Devas. And of course, Rock came and brought his awareness of the nature spirits and the nature kingdoms. And it was this powerful combination of individuals who were there to anchor something. And just the same call that I've been responding to, which was that we're entering a time in human history when we absolutely have to see the world in its wholeness and represent and recognize that all life is interconnected, all life is interdependent, but that life extends beyond the physical dimension, that really the world is a great ecosystem, a great ecology that includes both subtle and physical domains. And I've been aware of the subtle world ever since, well, as long as I can remember, for my entire life. And for me, the subtle worlds are simply another ecosystem. It's filled with organisms that don't inhabit physical bodies, but do inhabit bodies of energy and spirit. And there's nothing supernatural about them. They're part of the ordinariness of the universe, but it's an ordinariness that in our culture in the West, we've truly forgotten. And part of Findhorn's task was to remind us to bring that awareness of the wholeness of the world and our ability to connect with its spiritual and subtle domains back into cultural memory, back to highlight that and to demonstrate it, so that it wasn't simply a theory, and it wasn't just a religious belief or a mystical belief or an occult belief, but it was something that was practiced. It was something that was demonstrated. It was something that was embodied in people's lives. And that was the thrill of being part of Findhorn in those days, because we were really trying to live up to this call to be a demonstration of the wholeness of ourselves and the wholeness of the world. Well, and as I say, in the many years since then, in working here in the United States and in traveling with and seeing various other centers, I can really appreciate what the founders of Findhorn accomplished. But I want to say, and I mean this sincerely, that the term founder is not one that's limited by time. When we think of the founders, we think of people back at the beginning of something. But Findhorn is always beginning. And each of you is as much a founder as I was, or as Peter was, or Eileen, or Rock, or Dorothy. Findhorn is birthing itself all the time from each of you, from everyone who's there. And the spirit of Findhorn is birthing itself all the time from the thousands of people throughout the world who have been to this place and have had their lives changed, or at least touched by the spirit that's within it. So in celebrating the founders through this program, I think that's very important. And I'm so glad to see people like Lena and Rock being celebrated along with Dorothy and Peter and Eileen. And actually, I will give a shout out to Joan Hartnell-Beavis, who was Eileen's, really her best friend. Eileen would spend part of every night in Joni's bungalow, which became Dorothy's bungalow when Dorothy moved back, in meditation. And Joni was really her support, the person that created a safe space within which Eileen could do her inner work. And Joni, who had her own wealth, was a significant source of financial support for the early community that enabled things to be built and things to manifest. So hardly anybody knows about Joni these days, and she's not usually thought of as a founder, but in my heart, she really was one of the early founders. So as I say, it's wonderful to call all of us back to your awareness. And I recognize that the community is wanting to recover its roots and to get a new sense of the spiritual vision that gave birth to this place. But I feel it's important to recognize that those are living roots within each of you, and you're forming your own new root system that the Findhorn that moves on in the 21st century may very well be different from the Findhorn that was founded in 60 years ago. It may have to be different in order to carry its essential spirit forward, the spirit of wholeness, the spirit of community, the spirit of the sacredness within all things, the spirit of love of people for each other, and love of people for the earth. And to carry forward as well this demonstration that the world is a wholeness that's composed of the physical and non-physical realms. And the partnership between these two aspects of this great planetary ecosystem is very important. And Findhorn is a demonstration of that. But how you demonstrate it, that's going to be for you to determine. For you are the founders of the next 60 years of this community and beyond. Thank you very much. And thank you again for the privilege of taking part in your program today.
One of my favorite mystics is Meister Eckhart. And Meister Eckhart says that God is constantly giving birth to the universe. She's lying on her back, giving birth right now to the universe. And it's always happening today. It's always happening now. Amazing. Okay, so now I'd like to invite Michael to come forward and to talk about the trustees and keeping the flame alive. Thank you.
So how do you follow that? I think that was tremendous. It was David's also always very inspiring. And I was particularly taken with the idea of the wholeness of the world. And really what I wanted to talk about was nothing to do with the trustees particularly, but just to remember that when in the 70s when I got here, there was a great feeling of building a new world, of creating the new, of living in a new way, in fact, creating a new culture. And what David, I think, was just saying is we continually rebirth, we continually redo that. And my question tonight is, what is the next step in that? What is the next step in building a new culture and building a new world? I've got actually a little quotation here from David when he was part of the blessing, of the re-blessing of the sanctuary at Treban in Iona. And he said, "May all who can open to the qualities of fiery hope, peace, joy, and love, and to the potential and energy of the new civilization unfolding around us. All you can be open to the civilization, the new civilization opening around us." What does that mean? And I hope this week we can maybe go inside and get a sense of what our role is in building this new civilization. And there's another quotation here from the mother who was the partner of Sri Aurobindo and the founder of Aurovo. And she said, "There should be somewhere on earth a place where all human beings of goodwill who have a sincere aspiration could live freely as citizens of the world and obey one single eternal authority, that of the supreme truth." And that was something called the dream, and is in a lot of the literature of Aurovo. And I think between these two, there is this idea, this sense of a freedom to do something new and to do something that is relevant. So we have our own inner tools to do that, which of course we've been talking about this evening, of inner listening and of turning within and of attunement, of getting things from a different level. So I hope we can use these tools as we envisage what our next steps might be. I also remember a thing that touched me deeply. It was a talk that David gave about manifestation. And he said, manifestation is not about receiving, but is about being the manifester. He said it's not about being the sunbather, but being the sun. And I feel that is something that may be a clue for us now, to turn to be the sun, to be the divine, to be that one truth, that supreme truth that the mother talked about. So, my question is, and my challenge is, where do we go from here? And obviously, we have to go in the wholeness of the world and in the wholeness of which this community is. So thank you.
Okay, we're going to bring a gathering. We, over to you.
Okay. So while we're waiting for our last singer to emerge, I'm just feeling very touched by what everybody said, but especially David, about this new civilization that we're creating. And in a way, that drew me to Findhorn, and also this concept that we are all part of the body of Christ. Each one of us is a member of that body. And so for our last song, I wanted us to bring that spirit of Christ into our midst, into our hearts, and become that light that can shine that love and truth into the world. So what I'd like us to do is to sing together. We have our singers here in a moment to hold the parts. But the words are, all I ask of you, love one another as I have loved you. And these songs often are like seeds. We can plant them and we water them and then we just let them grow and we don't know what's going to happen. Sometimes these words might pop into our minds and remind us of a message that we carry. So I would love our singers to come back on. And would it be possible that we all stand up as part of that body of Christ? You may not know the song, but we'll know it very quickly. And so I'm just encouraging us to hum along. And if it's not too much to ask, could we hold hands just to be that body of Christ together? Somehow hold on to somebody next to each other. Yes, wonderful. The one incredible family. So what we're going to do is, as I play the introduction, we'll just hum the melody so you can catch it, and then we'll hear the melody sung once so you can hear it, and then we'll bring in the harmonies. So join in any part that feels appropriate with you, and let's just feel that message in our hearts. Let's hum.
So let's take a moment to say yes to being a conduit for love, playing our part in the great commandment, the great invitation to be a loving presence in the world. We know that love is our greatest natural resource that can really take care of every challenge that we're faced with. Let us remember that every act of love is maximal. There is no end to the ripple that a single act of love creates. Let us also just take a moment to think of something or someone we are truly grateful for. Perhaps somebody who has helped us on our own spiritual path and who is helping us now. And the wonderful thing about tuning into the mystical impulse is that we get to have a new beginning in each and every moment. So here, as we celebrate the last 60 years, we're celebrating a new beginning. And for that, we're truly grateful. So be it.
Have a really blessed night, we might want to just give a few hugs before we leave.